which commemorates the 40th anniversary of the Apollo 15 mission with its all-Michigan crew.
There was instruments in space right now going to the planets. We've had many astronauts, we've had an Apollo crew where everybody on the crew was a graduate of the University of Michigan. On my mission, Carl Hanheis had earned his PhD here at the University of Michigan. So, University of Michigan's played a big role in the space program and continues to play a role.
All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and lift off.
Do humans have a place in space? That's a great question.
Human exploration of space is really the most difficult enterprise, the most difficult endeavor we of a species have ever done and are likely to do.
In my opinion, the space program is a genetic drive that humans have to go into space, to find a place that's going to be safe. You know, Mars will be the next one. However, to me, the important thing about exploring space is developing the capability to do it.
I'm a lot of proud to be here. And guess what? We got a football team. I'm going to be down there. I'm going to be there tomorrow doing everything I can to help along. Great job they've done so far. I have a son-in-law with the Michigan State, though, so that's the other side of this story. But I got to tell you how proud I am to be a Michigan graduate. Now, I will tell you very frankly that I don't think I would have gotten where I got in the space program if I hadn't come here to the University of Michigan. I think the academic background required to do the kinds of things we did is essential, is critical. And of course, you got to have some flying, you got to be under 35, you got to be under 6 feet tall. Jack Lousman was a graduate. David was 2 years, I think, for a semester or so, but Jim and I both graduated from here. From there, I went out to test pilot school in England, and then I went to teach at the test pilot school in Edwards. I have to tell you, that was kind of interesting because as I was graduating from the test pilot school in England, we got a visit from the U.S. test pilot school, and the commandant back in those days was a gentleman by the name of Chuck Yeager. And when he got over there, he came over to me and said, "I need you back at the school." And I said, "Well, you're going to have to work through an awful lot of diplomatic channels to get me back." The funny part was he didn't even like me. Chuck did not particularly care for educated people, so that was a little bit of a problem for him. But I did go back and teach for a couple of years. NASA had a selection program, and I was fortunate enough to get in. And as we went down to Houston, that first year was tough. Let me tell you that we're going to do in a flight. We spent a year and a half as a backup crew for Apollo 12, and that was really a tough thing to do because they were all Navy crew. And that was really hard for us to put up with. But we got our way through it, and we trained very hard on how to fly the system. And then when we got assigned to Apollo 15, we really spent the majority of our time learning the science that we were going to pursue on our flight. A lot of it had to do with geology. So we studied geology extensively for that year and a half. And of course, if you're studying geology, you have to make field trips. Hawaii for 10 days, Alaska for 10 days, Iceland for about 6 days. These are tough trips to make, I gotta tell you. They were really hard. But we learned a lot of geology. We learned a lot of other things also. And my particular pursuit was in photography and learning as much as we could about this old Earth-Moon system. And there's some things about the system that only astronomers can talk about, but there are things called Lagrange points, which are equilibrium points in the Earth-Moon system. There are two of them, L4 and L5. They're supposed to be stable equilibriums. Down those lunar surface, got that thing all to myself, and I spent about 20 hours a day doing the science that we had to do in a flight. And a lot of that came right back to the kinds of things that we learned here in Michigan. And I will never forget, we spent a lot of time studying and practicing a thing called rendezvous and docking. We had to do that in lunar orbit to make the flight successful. So we did all that training for rendezvous docking. You know where I got everything I knew about rendezvous docking? Guess where I got it? Right here. Guy by the name of Harm Buning, who was a very, very good professor and a very close friend back in those days. And that's where we got the academic, the theory of all of that, of changing orbits and making a rendezvous, performing a rendezvous docking. We got a lot of that here. I said in the movie here that the last thing I said was, students in Michigan today, you're sitting in a catbird seat. I witnessed the radio signals from a little satellite that the guys here at school put up this morning. They went into orbit this morning. And this is like the second or third time in orbit for this little satellite. It's a satellite, it's about like that, okay? But they got a radio signal. It's a 1/10 of a watt transmitter, hardly anything. But they're listening to it and they're learning all about this stuff. And these are the guys, believe it or not, these are the people that are going to get us to Mars someday. We need another president, I think, to do that. But anyway, I have a problem. He may be a great president, but he doesn't support the space program very well, in my opinion. So I say that anyway. I'm rather prejudiced about the space program. But that's my opinion. Is that the students today are going to be, they're the future of the country, and they're getting the best education they can get right here in Michigan. And with that, I am going to introduce my partner's daughter, who's going to come up and say a few words. Jan will come up. Oh, I'm sorry, Jill. It's Jill. Jim Irwin. You know what? Jim Irwin had lots of daughters. So, Jill, Irwin, Christansen.
In any of the records. But we did, Mom had a box in the closet that Dad said if anything ever happened to him, that she was to open that box. But thank goodness it never did happen to him. Anyway, we moved to Texas. Dad was selected for the space program in '66. And we moved to Houston, and that's when we joined the astronaut families. And it wasn't, and I want to hear those stories. Those are what's important to me, because my dad was away from us because he was with you guys. And I want to hear that. That's what's important to me now. Also, the one thing that you do have to know about my dad is that when he went to the moon, his life was changed. He felt God's presence so strong on the moon that it forever changed his life, and he spent the next 20 years of his life going around the world telling people his story. And I again wanted to say thank you so much, just for the honor of my husband John and I being able to be here to share this part of it with you guys.
I'm now doing I'm on like a developmental thing where I'm Mr. Deputy Moneybags, the Deputy Chief Financial Officer, but I come from the operations side. One of the folks who I grew up planning spacewalks, training astronauts, working in mission control. One of the astronauts I work with, a guy by the name of Scott Altman, he's a shuttle commander, former shuttle commander now. He said things have changed for the astronauts recently. You know, back when Al was around, they got interest-free home loans and Corvettes and these kind of things. He said when he became an astronaut, he had to sell his Corvette to pay for his home loan and get a good rate. So it's a little bit different nowadays, but it's still, you know, you got to have the right stuff. So a little bit about what's next for human spaceflight for all of us to think about. By Cory Booker and our folks from Lockheed. Next slide. I guess I have this here. I can go in advance. Okay, shuttle program is over. I loved it. Of course, Tony England's flight is right here. Back at the earlier shuttle days. Fantastic program, but for the foreseeable future of human spaceflight, we'll be flying astronauts on Russian Soyuzes. Now, how did that come about? Well, we had a program that we were working on to try and build a new rocket, and it was called Constellation. That, of course, has kind of been that program is canceled. We still, out of the ashes of that, we're still building this, the Orion capsule, but that's going to fly on a different rocket than we foresaw. So for the next while, we've got crews on space station that are flying on Russian Soyuzes. The current crew that's up there right now in video. But when when they're down to 3 crew, they're largely involved in spacecraft husbandry and working on the spaceship. We're going to get back up to 6 crew in just a few weeks/month or so here. Folks may have heard there was a problem with a Russian Progress launch. That's an unmanned version of the Soyuz. So there's actually a Progress launching to the space station. Hopefully it gets up on Sunday. The Russians have fixed their engine problems. And the next Soyuz launches on the 14th of November. We've got American Dan Burbank and a couple of cosmonauts going up on that one. Dan's a very good friend of mine. I helped train him on some earlier spacewalks. Oh, incidentally, a little bit about the Soyuz. So, funny story. So for shuttle, we could fit the 15th percentile female to the 95th percentile male, a lot more than just being 6 foot tall, which was for Apollo. Well, now that we've got to fly with the Russians for a little while here, we're kind of back to constrained sizes. So, you know, somewhere about between 5'5" and about 6'2" is, you know, we're kind of back in the constrained world. Space station, fantastic machine. I helped develop pieces of it and get it built as a spacewalk person with NASA. This national lab in space at about 200 miles up is the big things we're working on: space and life sciences. How do we expand humans in space for longer? How do we bring back new discoveries and findings in medicine, biology, cell growth, pharmaceuticals, materials, both metallurgy and non-metallurgy kind of things, combustion. So this is going to bring back a lot of new technology that's going to spur us towards the future of spaceflight. Bring the crew to orbit. It's going to have a capability of 70 metric tons. It'll have space shuttle main engines, which are LOX, hydrogen, and 2 solid rocket, 5-segment solid rocket boosters on the sides. Upper stage will be a J2X engine, but that will be evolvable. So that's the crew one. So here we again look at the evolution of different rockets that have either been built or tested. You can see the Saturns here, the Nova booster, which was a concept that never flew. This would be that 70-ton version, and then we're looking at a 130 metric ton version, which will be able to carry bigger cargo out into space and be able to supply us as we go to Mars and other destinations. So what is the future? We want to go to deep space exploration. We want to use this NPC, the Orion NPCV for all these places. This is going to require an infrastructure, not just a small capsule, but we need landing craft, the Earth return vehicle.